to Virginia Code 2.2-3708.2, Section A3 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. The board moves that the board resolve to meet by electronic communication means via RingCentral without a quorum of the board of directors of GRTC physically assembled at one location because 1, the city of Richmond has declared a local state of emergency pursuant to Section 44-146-21 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 2, the catastrophic nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location. And 3, the purpose of the meeting is to provide for the continuity of operations of GRTC and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept that motion as read by Julie.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we, hey, Ian, we just preempted your motion here. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so we've done that. And we're meeting electronically, and I'm calling to order the meeting of the Board of Directors of GRTC in January, isn't it? And I think we have some letters to read, right?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. That is correct. Because we just read the full language for the electronic communication means, I will not read mine in full. I'll give the abbreviated version. This meeting is being conducted through electronic communication means pursuant to and in compliance with Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708A3 as previously outlined. The public notice, meeting agenda, and agenda attachments for this January 18th, 2022 standing meeting of the boards of GRTC, RideFinders, and Old Dominion Transit Management Company were posted on January 14th, 2022 at ridegrtc.com. Per the meeting notice, all written comments received via email by Carrie Rose Pace prior to 5 p.m. on the day preceding a meeting were provided to all members of the board the night before the meeting and are read during the public comment period of the meeting by staff following the 2-minute speaking limit and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Also, per the meeting notice, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and will be available for viewing later. This meeting, I received 2 submitted comments in writing, Mr. Chair.
All right.
From Sally Brazil, Media Transit, Inc. Dear GRTC board members, we want to thank GRTC for the opportunity to be of service during the past 20 years. Other than the past few months, we have had a mutually beneficial partnership with GRTC, developing and maintaining a significant revenue stream for the transit company. Worth noting, we have turned away over $400,000 in renewals and new business since this program was suspended. This revenue can't be recouped and will be replaced with additional tax subsidies. As we wrap up our operations, we are requesting to be paid our regular commissions on any accounts still current and being billed with contracts, as well as any accounts currently on a month-to-month basis. We brought this business to GRTC in good faith and contractually consider this work performed as our contract specifies. We are also open to negotiating an accelerated payment to finalize our operations with GRTC. We thank you for your attention to this matter. Next, from Charles Robideau, Chesterfield resident, to the GRTC Board of Directors, today, January 18th, 2022. Recently, I have read reports by the Greater Washington Partnership advising Richmond and the GRTC how to develop our transit system. Unfortunately, these reports fail to address the system's greatest problem, the refusal of Henrico and Chesterfield counties to join the city of Richmond in the transit effort. Chesterfield, which half owns, GRTC, allows buses into the county for only a single route, while Henrico maintains the status of GRTC's customer rather than the partner it should be. 14 years ago, the 2008 mass transit study by the Richmond Area Transit Planning Organization issued this call to action, quote, "To move ahead will require the cooperation and coordination of all the jurisdictions in the region," end quote. 9 years ago, the Anti-Poverty Commission created by Richmond Mayor Dwight C. Jones reported, quote, relatively few jobs in Metro Richmond are reachable by transit at all. Suburban jobs in particular are almost totally out of reach by transit, not just for city residents, but for all residents of the region, end quote. I am one of more than 350,000 Chesterfield residents who might ride buses. Instead, we see our hopes for transit buried under mushrooming residential communities reached only by ever wider roads designed for cars only. GRTC is our only hope for release from the ever-growing domination by cars. We look to you for help, with thanks for what you do every day to further this cause. Mr. Chair, this concludes the public comments for today.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that our CEO will discuss the advertising issue later in the meeting, and I'll have a couple of winks at Mr. Rovedo's comments when it becomes my turn. Could we have approval of the minutes of the previous meeting?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any additions and corrections? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the last meeting say aye.
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 All opposed? It's done. Thank you very much. So now Adrian Torres report. Hi, Adrian.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah,
Mr. Chair?
yeah.
If I might, we have a couple of scheduling requests from board members to make a change to the agenda if it is the desire of the chair and the board that the financial and administrative report become first, operations second, and then development and engagement last on the board agenda today.
And why is this?
There are some hard deadlines this morning.
Yeah,
So
I have a
people-
hard stop at 10 a.m.
And you want to see the finance first?
Those are the finance report has 2 action items that would be it would be most a good for the entire board to take action on.
Okay, do it.
Thank you, sir. So
Mhm.
John will go first. Apologies for not getting that in front of you sooner, sir.
Sorry. Hi, John.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm going to share my screen to start the first item under the Finance Administrative Report would be the financial report. Okay. All right, so now we're starting on page 59 of the slide deck for the November 2021 financial report. So moving over to slide page 60 in the report, the source of funds for the period of 5 months ended November 30th, 2021. Very similar to the prior month's reports. Revenues are unfavorable to budget by $3.17 million, primarily in the federal funds area, $2.9 million on the 5307 PM Flex, and the balance of the $308,000 on the CARES Act versus budget. And this is primarily due to the fact that our operating expenses are favorable to budget by 3.31 million. So therefore, lack of reimbursement requirement. Still see the directly generated funds are slightly favorable to budget, slightly favorable to the budget of 1.23 million, as is the local government funds are relatively on budget, on a budget of 13.45 million, and the state is also relatively on budget at a $5.127 million. Moving over to the operating expense side, on slide, the eye chart is on page 62, but going to slide 63 and 64, where we see the operating expenses at the bottom of slide 64, you'll see as I report it, operating expenses are $3.3 million favorable on a budget of $26.5 million, primarily, as we've shared in previous briefings. Labor is favorable by $2.3 million relative to budget. That is being driven, as you've been briefed on previously, the favorable headcount in the operators as well as in the maintenance sections. For this month that we reported, we were about 35 positions favorable in operations and about 17 favorable in maintenance. There is some slight overtime that's offsetting some of that favorability, but primarily that's the bulk of the majority of the favorability. We do have some favorable services relative to budget, and that's basically the majority of that's the timing of contract maintenance services on building maintenance. Materials and services consumed slightly favorable at 138,000. Just about the timing of other equipment and supplies purchases relative to the calendarization of budget. Casualty and liability costs were favorable 235,000 relative to budget of 965, and this is primarily due to at the renewal in the months of May and July, or it's a July board meeting. The GRTC's risk management group is binding the policies of the Virginia Transit Liability Pool, which is resulting in a premium reduction over the direct placement with specific carriers. So those are kind of the highlights of what the operating expenses, which are driving the favorable, which then ultimately is driving the unfavorable revenues. As you can see it on slide 76, we have the total income statement as reported. Our net operating revenue is at 3.175 million unfavorable, and as you can see further down, the operating expenses at $3.3 million favorable. So they offset to slightly a positive $130,000 positive fund balance. Basically we're break even for the 5 months year to date. Moving over to slide 77, the balance sheet. This is showing the balance sheet as of November 30th, and you can see the trend upwards from year end, and more or less the cash cycle. Cash is strengthening at $7.8 million. Our receivable balances are down from the prior months as well as year end due to the collection of the receivables. Other items to note, the deferred revenues of CVTA, $20.5 million. I'll show you the CVTA quarterly report in a few slides. But overall, the balance sheet's strong, no concerns there. Moving over to slide 78, the cash flow statement. We exited the month of November with a $4.9 million cash position. And actually at the end of December, we exited the year end with 2.68 million cash position, and January these balances are expected to increase as we're pulling over the CVTA third quarter operating funding, as well as reimbursement for federal CARES Act and reimbursements for the purchase of buses. As you can see here, the vehicle purchase of 6.9 million was realized, and then the reimbursements will be coming through between the state and the federal portions. Moving over to slides 79, this is the CVTA Special Fund Quarterly Report. As required by the MOU, we have 45 days from the end of the quarter to file, which we're anticipating to file slightly condensed version of this report, but highlights for the quarter. You can see that during the months of October, November, December, GRTC received 2.3, 3.4, and $2.5 million of distributions on the 15% fund into our funds. Some positive and negative unrealized losses offsetting the interest income in the LGIP extended maturity. There were no uses of these funds in preparing the GRTC Regional Public Transportation Plan. I anticipate expenses being in the third quarter for that. We do have our second quarter draws here of 4.74 million and 184,000 for the operating and capital, respectively. So at the end of December 31st, we have a fund balance of 20.98 million with the balance of about 2.7 million remaining in the Wells Fargo account, with a balance of 18.2 million in our LGIP extended maturity. And as noted, the majority of the 2.7 million, about 2.38 million of the balance in Wells Fargo was transferred into the GRTC's operating accounts in January to start the initial funding for the third quarter operating expenses. At this point, before I move on, if there's any questions, I'll address them now. Next, at this time, I want to provide the members of the board an update on the status of the fiscal 2023 operating and capital budgets. First, I will brief the board on the draft expenses and revenues, and then I'll have Keisha brief the board on the fiscal year 2023 capital plan. I'm going to unshare and then reshare my screen. Can you see this one? Is this being shared?
Nope.
Okay. All right, one more time. There we go.
Still not shared, John.
There we go.
There we are.
How's that?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so I wanted to first go over the key assumptions. This is our draft 2023 operating expense budget. We're still in the process of refining it, but as of where we are right now, so the key assumptions are the collective bargaining unit. We have, based upon the collective bargaining unit agreement that's in place, we have a 4% top wage rate increase where the hourly rate is going to $26.81 per hour. In addition to that, the defined benefit pension plan funding is increasing for the GRTC's portion from 14 to 15%. Initially at this point, still under review, but our headcount is flat with the fiscal year 2022 adopted headcount. Of note, currently at this point, there's 50 vacant positions that are in the budget that there is an assumed vacancy factor. We assume that at least 9 months out of the year for all vacant positions that are going on in there. And this also is contemplating the completion of the administrative staff classification study. Also, this budget also has to remove.
John, stop right there on that. What do you mean? We're assuming that we will continue to have 50 vacant positions through FY 2023?
No, this is just, the assumption is that we will fill those 50 vacant positions throughout the year, but we're going to budget 9 months of the salary, assuming that there's going to be, it's not going to be all July 1st, but, you know, give and take a little bit over the period. And this budget also contemplates the removal of some of the legacy fare collection expenses. One of the items to note is like the credit card processing fees associated with the fare boxes. Also in this operating expense, its assumption is that we're going to have a dual option for the medical benefits, which we will go later, which is a resolution coming up further. So we're going to have the Cigna Open Access Plan, which is our current plan, as well as the introduction of the Cigna Consumer Driven Wellness Program. This is expected to be cost neutral to GRTC with respect to the operating budget. And you'll see in the resolution later, we'll go through the details, how it looks from the perspective of the employee. The insurance and safety, as we just reported in the operating report year-to-date November, you will see a reduction in the premiums for the insurance and safety, and that reflects the continued participation in Virginia Transit Liability Pool. And also from, in here in the draft 2023 operating budget, we've removed the COVID relief expenses from the baseline budget. We're going to track those separately. And the assumption is that there's no growth in service, and the revenue miles and revenue hours are consistent with the fiscal 2022 operating budget that was adopted.
Julie, will we discuss that? The no
Yes,
growth
we'll
in
be-
service statement in your report or at some point?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
This is, I think it's relevant, incredibly relevant to understand that this is considered to be a preliminary review of our assumptions for baseline of our service and baseline of our budget. We will discuss possible expansion later on when Adrian reports.
Thank you.
Yes, as Julie said, this is just wanted to brief the board as to what are some of the preliminary assumptions and what it looks like. But as very much like last year, we're going to provide the walk across to get to the final budget as we learn more from the regional transportation plan. As there's some large items such as the new enrollment and the health plan. As we get more crystallized participation, we're going to true up these numbers as well. But as of right now, by looking at it, with those assumptions baked in, and it's, like I said, it's labeled up here as draft. It is preliminary. Currently, the first crack at this is $63.7 million of operating expenses, which is less than a 1% growth. And this is on the baseline, trying to pull out and recognize that this is the true baseline cost of GRTC, not having the additional expenses in there related to COVID, which are being funded by the CARES Act, CRISA, as well as ARPA. But basically, as you can see here in the operations and the largest category it's increasing, this is basically the payroll increases, as I mentioned before, on the 4% increase based on the collective bargaining unit contract, and also in here, because this is by function of operations, this is an increase on Spectran on the contract, as we anticipate the cost of that to go up, as well as some of the demand to go up. Maintenance is down slightly, and this is more or less function of a reduction in janitorial services, about, as we get staffing up, more of an insourcing of that. Once again, we're in the process of evaluating that. On the benefits line, it's slightly positive. This is showing, I made the comment about the combination of the two is about cost neutral. Right now, it's showing about $150,000 reduction over prior year. Once again, as we get open enrollment at actual figures, we'll actually be able to crystallize this number more precisely. Insurance and safety, you see the reduction from 3.5 to 3.1. This is basically due to the participation in the Virginia liability pool versus going to the open market to bind policies. Planning and scheduling, relatively flat. Communications and marketing is down slightly, and this is more or less due to removing the advertising, the multimedia advertising, and pulling that out, because that's more or less going to be funded with the CRISA money. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So this is more or less just trying to reflect what the base costs are for the base core business. Information technologies are up slightly, and this is more or less due to grant reimbursed software. Administrative is relatively flat, as is the operating taxes and licenses. Same perspective, but just by the categories, as you can see, the wages and benefits are up. The maintenance is down. That's more or less the janitorial. Fuels and lubricants, slight increase. The services, slight increase. The casualty insurance, as we talked about, the participation in the liability pool. Materials and services, this is the going up, and this is for for the IT aspect of it. So the other items are relatively flat. So going over to the revenue side, proposed headcount, as I showed, headcount's flat, about 50 vacancies. As you can see that, currently, the operators, as we were putting this budget together at the end of December, operators are at about 22 vacancies. Mechanics were 13 between the two categories. And we had some part-time operators and maintenance staff as well that made up that. But the assumption is that these positions will be filled, and they'll be filled for about 9 months out of the 12-month period. Moving over to the operating revenue assumptions, and right now this current version, and this is preliminary and this is draft, this currently has no growth in revenue miles or hours. Is in here, this has a DRPT zero fare grant, of which $4.5 million is being funded by DRPT, and the balance of $1 million is being funded by the city of Richmond. This budget also has advertising revenue in there contemplated. The VCU Bon Secours naming is around $425,000, and the balance is the assumption from the revenue program, about $180,000. And I will provide you a briefing on the advertising revenue status a little bit later as well. And this also contemplates the use of the FTA 5307 Flex for preventive maintenance, as well as it assumes the renewal of the VCU business partnership agreement as well. So throwing those in there, obviously to have a flat $63.7 million, you can see that the FTA PM Flex money is slightly up a little bit, driven a little bit by some of the revenues, the expenses that are eligible for PM Flex. We assume that the DRPT operating grants are flat. This is, as I mentioned before, the slight increase in the operating expense reimbursement for grants. This is basically driven by IT software and maintenance contracts. The city of Richmond, this is their number for the operating grants, operating support that we received for their confirmation. We assume that the county of Henrico is flat with the prior year, as is the county of Chesterfield and the city of Petersburg. The business partnerships, this is basically the VCU contract. We put some assumptions in there with regards to what the renewal might look like. This is also, because this is a draft, to talk about our lead times in there and so forth. That would have a potential impact on what that contract renewal would be. The fair replacement, this is the $5.5 million, $4.5 million from DRPT and the $1 million from Richmond. And as we're kind of pulling the baseline expenses, we don't have a federal COVID relief amount here in the revenue. That's going to be on a side schedule. CVTA forecasted operating support $21.4 million, and that's based upon the December forecast from VDOT. That's assuming that we're going to be putting approximately $5 million aside for a reserve for growth. And this also contemplates the removal of a share for about $750,000 for support for capital from CVTA. And, you know, as this is a draft preliminary budget, I just, as you recall, at the end of our fiscal year 2021, we exited the year with an operating surplus, and we would come back to the board. So right now at this point, just to balance it out, dropped in $534,000 of use of that prior year surplus from fiscal year 21 in here to balance this out. So as I mentioned on the next slide here, we talked about the COVID relief. As Julie has briefed members of the board in the previous months here, we have a couple different categories. Our fiscal year 2022, which is basically our HSA funding, we had $1.895 million of facility fleet clean operator latrines and PPE. That a part of that will probably not be fully expended by the end of fiscal year 22, and that may carry over to 23. That's why this line is here. We have the fiscal 2023 employee recruitment program. This is our multimedia advertising campaigns, in addition to any incentive pay for the onboarding of operators and mechanics. We did have in the operating budget, we have identified about $1.4 million in multimedia advertising for fiscal 23, which is a separate line item, which is going to be applied against here. We had contemplated $800,000 in fiscal 23 for the consumer wellness health plan support, and then $1 million for fleet and passenger communication technology, $1.5 million towards bench shelters and landing pads, as well as $1.5 million for mobility pilots. So this is kind of the assumption, you know, of some of the types of projects and expenses that would be funded via the CRISA and ARPA funds. We anticipate the CARES Act will be exhausted prior to fiscal 23 starting. So that's on a very high level, just kind of where we are to date and the operating assumptions. And this is, as Julie said, this is very preliminary and draft format, but we just wanted to share that with the members of the boards of our progress and what are some of the key assumptions that we're working with at the moment. If there's any questions, I'll take those now before I transition this over to Keisha Reed for the capital portion.
Does the the budget proposal of the new governor to delay the collection of the gasoline tax affect our revenue?
John, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that was my comment, and you can, if you can embellish or share or change it, you know, that's more or less a CVTA item because the excise tax is the funding of that. They have not altered that. This is our funds in there from CVTA are based upon the December 2021 VDOT forecast. And if there's any impact, I'm sure they'll brief us on that.
Also, if I might add to that, Mr. Chair, we have been, since we started CVTA, which isn't that long, we've always been using to date prior year funds to fund our current fiscal year. So this FY23 budget would assume the same. We would use our FY22 collections of CVTA funds to fill in our FY23. Right now, it is unclear whether or not the governor's proclamations will have an impact on legislated collections of dollars or how that will proceed. If it does impact us, it will not impact us until the following fiscal year, because again, we're always using the prior year's funds. So we'll be watching that very closely, but it will not affect our FY23 operations.
If there's no more questions, I'll stop sharing and I'll cede the floor to Keisha Reed, who will brief you on the fiscal 23 capital budget plan. we have to start filing our grant applications with DRPT by the end of the month of January. So Keisha's going to walk you through what we have at this point.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My screen. Okay. So this presentation reflects a list of prioritized projects we anticipate applying for state support for the 2023 fiscal year. We are presenting these for your general concession of the projects prior to our application with DRPT later this month. As the projects move forward, we will bring each project to this board for approval. This slide breaks down our federal, state, and local obligation for the projects we anticipate moving forward. These numbers do not include our flexing of the 5307 funds from capital to operating. The total of the projects is $17.6 million. The projects are broken down into categories of safety, state of good repair, and business improvement. These estimates are our agency's independent cost estimates. The final project cost will fluctuate as we continue to procure these goods and services. Under safety and regulatory, $1.5 million will be spent as follows. In the IT department, we'll have a fleet live video, which will provide security video of fixed route buses for security purposes. They will also undertake GRTC's website upgrade. The current website is updated and is not ADA compliant. Under maintenance, they will perform bus lift replacement project. Planning will have a consultant develop our TSP, which is a strategic blueprint for implementing better transit over a 10-year period across the region serviced by GRTC. Under state of good affairs, state of good repair. Under facility, BRT station repairs is due to accidents and vandalism. We will upgrade our building chiller, which is our HVAC. Bus wash upgrade, we will complete the upgrade on the second side of the bus wash to include brushes. Under IT, our normal annual maintenance contracts, radio dispatch software. The current system is no longer supported by the vendor. Access control system, which is a remote control and manage all doors and gates of the property via a cloud-based software. Under maintenance, it will replace shop bay doors and column lifts. They'll also be replacing, under fleet, we'll be replacing paratransit vehicles and fixed route buses. There will be 21 buses and 12 paratransit vehicles, which will pass their useful life at FY23. Under planning, they'll design and print of system maps, which will be easy to read and visually appearing digital and print passenger information and wayfaring materials, including individual, neighborhood, and system maps. Under business improvement, IT will perform 2 projects, bus lane enforcement study, where they will work with the city of Richmond to study how our system would interact with their system to enforce ticketing of unauthorized vehicles in bus lanes. And also Microsoft management software, which maintains infrastructure security. It monitors our agency's services and devices to proactively alert IT of issues. We will have federal funding using our funds from previous years, which have rolled over. We continue to seek other opportunities for funding in order to spread our funding out to complete other necessary projects. Our local funds consist of general funds and CVTA funds in the future. If there are no questions or comments, I will turn it back over to John. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to John.
If there's no other question, that concludes our briefing on the financial report at this time. And then I, just turn over to the next item up for discussion will be the recent and upcoming procurements with Tanya.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Let's see, let me get to the right section. Okay. Procurement's report can be found on pages 80 and 81 of your board packet. We've added one new information systems procurement to the report for our Clever Devices annual software maintenance renewal. Clever software provides fleet management, operations control, and real-time passenger information technology, and that's just to name a few of its functions. This software is proprietary and support can only be provided by Clever, making this a sole source procurement. Staff estimates the cost of this year's renewal to be $240,000. This expense was approved in the FY22 capital budget, and the funds are available for use at this time. I do want to acknowledge the fact that the list of procurements is growing, and one of the reasons for this is that the procurement department is experiencing significant staffing shortages, which is impacting our ability to work through some of the projects on this list, in addition to many that are already in our daily queue. We have identified a short-term solution, which I will share with you after John's next report.
Thank you.
Are there any questions at this time? Thank you.
John, you up?
Yes, sir. Okay, the next one on the agenda item would be the advertising and program revenues update. That's slide 82 in our deck. And I do have a quick presentation, but basically it's just from the background. At the October 26th Board of Directors meeting, the approval was given to suspend the GRTC vehicle advertising program while staff studied the impact of the recent and pending court filings. And we were tasked with a update for the January 2022 board meeting. The update for right now is we are currently in the process of reviewing the national advertising policies and the local priorities and the needs in order to bring a full informed recommendation to the board no later than June 22nd. But what I have some slides here I'd like to share, just kind of to highlight some of the the magnitude and of the advertising revenue, what our experience has been since the suspension, and kind of a forecast looking at the whole fiscal 2022. So let me share my screen again. Okay, so up here, on the program status, as I just mentioned, we suspended the program due to judicial challenges. So there were no new advertising contracts or graphic changes allowed to the advertisements following the suspension. The existing contracts were going to be honored and continued, provided the customers continued to pay. The expired contracts can continue on a month-to-month basis, as provided that the customers continue to pay. And in the event of non-payment, GRTC will remove any of the advertisements for non-paying customers following notice. So we're currently still undertaking the policy review and re-implementation, and we'll bring that to the board back, as we mentioned, no later than June of 2022. Next slide here. Oops, let's bounce down. A little bit of an eye chart, but basically what this is showing over here is that the total advertising revenues, and this is gross prior to any commissions, is $244,000. The amount of activity since October, freezing of the contract was about $82.83 million. $82,830 were billed, primarily about $52,000 in the month of November, $22,000 in the month of December, and we've billed invoice another $7,800 in the month of January. This basically is, a majority of this is folks continuing on a month-to-month basis. And as you can see, the third column, and traditionally, the advertising.
John, get rid of your thumbnails there, will you, so we can get a larger picture?
There you go.
Thanks.
back one slide. So about 66,000 of the balance of 244,000 that was invoiced in the year is still outstanding. Approximately, obviously, the entirety of 7845 is from January, so the balance of a little about $59,000 is outstanding. A good portion of that is without selling in here, which is, I believe, was the Caesars advertising program. The transit media does not get their commissions until we actually are paid by the vendors, or by the customers rather. So looking at going forward, how's it reflect relative to the advertising budget? We have $605,000 of advertising revenues. Year to date through January, we have $244,548 in gross revenue. You offset the 29% commission. That was a net of about $177,588. Based upon, the residual month to month, maybe another 3,000 to 5,000 gross per month until we actually re-implement a policy. Year to date through January 2022, we have the VCU Bon Secours naming revenue. It's $35,416 per month. So that's $425,000 per year. So pretty much based upon the outlook of our 605,000, we're on track to hit that for the fiscal year 2022. And the assumption, as I mentioned in the fiscal year 23, was relatively flat at 605. So we still would have the VCU Bon Secours naming revenue in there, and the assumption would be doing about $180,000 net in the advertising program. As you can see, we're at 177 net through January 2022. So I think that there's not a budgetary risk for fiscal year 2022 while we take the time to review and implement the new policy.
So John, was the VCU Bon Secours naming revenue included in the adopted operating budget, or was it in a different line item?
No, it's in that line item of the 605, the 425,000 of the 605
to start with.
So we're left about $180,000 for the advertising on the sides of buses.
Okay. Any questions, folks? Thank you.
John, real quick, break it down for me from like a month-to-month basis. I know we still have money coming in because we're still charging advertisers on their current contracts, but we have to be, I guess our revenues have to be going down in general though on advertising. And we're going to be doing this through June of 2022. So we're still going to be net positive, but overall, how much money are we not receiving, or are we losing out on between now and June of 2022 while we continue to look at the court cases and figure everything out?
Well, I think that there was, and Julie can jump in too, but I think that there was some one-time revenue in there related to Caesars. That was a bulk of it. As you can see, July of 21 was around 16,700 a month. August was about 29,900. Then it shot up in September to 45. 69 in October, and that was more or less driven by this outselling, which is the Caesars advertising, which was a one-time increase. So I think, more or less, as you look in our January, what we invoiced, at the 7,000, it was $7,800. That's pretty much maybe the core business, and as to which is, when you take out the one-time hit from Caesars or the uptick. So as far as forecasting, probably, about $3,000 to $5,000 per month is kind of what our residual baseline would be while we do this. But our operating budget from the adopted was 605, of which the majority of the contribution was the VCU Bon Secours naming revenue. So
right, but to be fair, we really haven't had a consultant going out there and trying to get more ad revenue since October, obviously. So we don't know if there's any more one-time hits out there that could be coming in. I mean, it looks to me that if in July it was about $16,000 a month before the Caesars hit, and now we're projecting to be about $7,000 to $8,000 a month. We could be losing out on about $10,000 a month of the advertising revenue.
Yeah, there were some one hitters. If you see in the 16.5, there was a $5,000 one timer. So
yeah, and I would assume that there's always going to be some one timer coming in from different advertising based on their annual schedule and everything else like that. So it's still, I would say to be conservative, we're still probably missing out on about, $10,000 to $15,000 a month in revenue while we make our decision. So I would June of 2022 sounds like it's a long way off. If there's a way to expedite that and get our advertising contract back on the street, and figure that out quicker, I would definitely push for that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'm going to comment also. I asked for an update in January with the hopes that we'd have a plan that at least would have a better understanding of our concerns relative to discontinuing our advertising program. And I'm going to jump back on what Ian said was we're definitely losing out on revenue. So to me, this feels like it's a little more, critical thing that we be very intense about in terms of figuring out where we are with our advertising and starting to generate more advertising. So I'm still concerned about where we sit with that today, given that June is our next update on this. So please, I'm looking for more information on that, Julie and John.
and a commitment, I would say that June is not our next update on this, Julie and John.
Absolutely. We can come back as frequently as you like to provide some more information. We have some discussions with some possible solutions that I hope to have in the works here in the next couple of months. And the second we have those ready for public announcement, we'll bring those. I fully expect them to be ready well before June.
Thank you. All right, further comments? Thank you guys for staying on top of that. John, is that it for you or you got more?
I think for the reports, that's it, but then next are the action items under the Finance and Administrative.
All right,
The first one would be the action item for the procurement support that Tanya will brief you. She kind of alluded to in her procurement update about the shortage in staffing. So this is a solution or a short-term solution to help help in that procurement function area. At this time, I'll turn it over to Tanya.
So currently the procurement department consists of 2 staff members, and one of those members has a little over 1 year procurement experience under their belt. For the last several months, we have unsuccessfully attempted to recruit qualified candidates. Requests for goods and services are coming in faster than we can process them, and we're trying to prioritize what's needed the most at this time. Along with the need to properly support our internal customers, we need to ensure our policies and procedures are current, and we just don't have the bandwidth at this time to give it the attention it requires. As a result, we began to search for outside support and identified a Virginia state contract for procurement acquisition support services that we can utilize. Business Management Research Assistance is a current contractor providing procurement services for the state. And after reviewing their qualifications and proposal for supporting GRTC, we determined that they can assist with the entire procurement cycle. They can also analyze our current procurement processes and recommend improvements to internal controls, documentation, and regulation compliance, as well as assist with training needs and provide subject matter expertise as needed, which will be beneficial as we do have construction projects and other more complex procurements on the horizon. The BMRA staff proposed for this engagement has over 10 years of Federal Transit Administration experience. This contract will function as a time and material contract where only time performed will be billed at the hourly rates identified in your board action item. These services will be funded through federal COVID relief funds. We will expand our recruiting efforts by not only continuing to post locally, but also turn to national trade websites to identify qualified candidates. But in the interim, our recommendation is that the board authorizes the CEO to execute an agreement through May 2022 with Business Management Research Assistance Incorporated for a not to exceed amount of $150,000.
Thank you for that. Is it somebody make that as a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, George. Second, please.
Second.
All right. Well, how many positions are we short, Tanya, in terms of our own employment?
Have one employee on leave, and then we've lost 2 others.
So we need 2 new people plus the one to come back. Right. Okay. Any further conversation on this?
I assume that we are trying to rehire those 2 people, the vacancies right now too. So this is just a fill in the gap.
Yes, absolutely. And
Makes
we're
sense.
hoping to have that gap filled by May.
Okay.
So it's been moved and seconded that we authorize up to 150,000 for temporary help in the procurement department. Any further conversation? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's passed. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
All right, the second action item is I'll be briefing the board with is on the healthcare plan and the employee contributions to the HSA. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're now on slide 85 of the package. So what we have here, Marsh McClellan is the broker of record for GRTC Transit Systems employee benefit policies. Jointly, Marsh McClellan and GRTC leadership and HR developed a second plan design of medical insurance plan that is to be offered to GRTC employees during the upcoming open enrollment period, which is commencing this week, and will the plan benefit year starts March 1st, 2022. So we have our traditional OAP, which is an open access plan with Cigna, which is our current incumbent plan. And GRTC is going to introduce a consumer-driven wellness plan with an HSA component. So just this table here in the middle, just to give a brief high-level overview, the OAP, the Open Access Plan, which is a current offering, has no deductibles for the individuals or family. It has a maximum out-of-pocket for individual coverage of $4,500, $9,000 for the family. The Consumer-Driven Wellness Program is also a Cigna plan, so we'll use the same Cigna network, and it will be coupled with a health spending account. And this would, to make it differentiate, would have a $3,000 deductible for the individual and a $6,000 family deductible per annum. Remember, medical plan year, that would be from March 1st of 2022 through February 28th of 2023. This plan has a maximum out of pocket of $4,000 for the individual and $8,000 for the family. So what that means is for both of these plans, once either an individual or family has hit this limit, everything is then funded. The difference is that in a open access plan is that the premiums are higher. You know, the equivalent premiums for each of the coverage categories are higher. So you're paying Cigna to insure, whereas on the consumer-driven wellness program, the premiums are about 60% of the OAP. So therefore, the employee is going to use their money that we will fund through the HSA to provide their health care. That's the primary difference. So moving along onto here. So we marketed the 2 medical plans, and we received bids in from Cigna and 3 additional firms, Aetna, Anthem, and Optima. After carefully evaluating them, basically Cigna was provided the most compelling from the perspective of total cost to GRTC as well as to the employees. So as you can see here, or in the left column here, this is our existing monthly premium costs for the employee only, the employee plus children, spouse, and family coverage categories. And this is what the renewal is for the OAP. So the renewal is about 6% increase year over year. It was an effort to negotiate this down from they're all over the place at the beginning of the negotiations. As you can see here, the similar coverage categories for the consumer-driven wellness program. For the employee-only coverage is $698. So it's about 60% of what the premium. So when an employee would be making a cost contribution, they would be making a potential cost contribution of a lower premium. So when you look at this, you know, the assumption here that we model, we assume that we would have 15% of the eligible population switch from the OAP to the consumer-driven wellness program. This open enrollment for the new plan is going to be open to all GRTC employees, including the collective bargaining. The collective bargaining unit contracts require that we have to offer the OAP, which we are in this benefit offering here. We're offering choice of more than one program. Each individual employee has different circumstances, so having the ability to have a medical plan that might meet their benefits specifically is a good direction to go. So as I mentioned before, the OAP is a fully insured medical plan, and the pricing is based upon GRTC claims experience. Usually the pricing on a open access plan, the actual claims are about anywhere from 80 to 85% of the actual premium paid. So we're kind of in line based upon our quarterly reviews. Our claims experiences are running around 82% of the premiums paid. So basically, 17.5% of our premiums are going to profit of an overhead for Cigna, whereas as the consumer-driven plan, the premium we're paying is lower. So basically, the cost burden is shifted over, the actual medical claims expense is shifted over to GRTC, which we would not pay a markup on. So looking at this, how we would tailor this new plan, our current existing OAP, we have our employees contributing 15% of the premium on a monthly basis for all categories. We're proposing for the renewal of the OAP plan, we're going to be consistent at 15%, but to incentivize our employees to possibly take a look at and switch over to the consumer-driven wellness plan, we're going to not require the employee-only coverage to have a zero employee contribution towards premium, and the other categories at 10%. And we're going to fund the eligible employees who opt to enroll in the consumer-driven wellness program to fund the individual only at $2,400 per annum, and for the other categories, $3,900. So as you recall, there's a $3,000 deductible for the employee-only coverage. So GRTC would be funding $2,400 towards that deductible, and for the $6,000 deductible for the employee plus categories, we would be funding $3,900. I will show you in another slide or so how that looks from the employee's perspective. Following the introductory plan year, it is management's intention to continue this level of funding, the $2,400, $3,900 in the future. We don't want to pull that back. In the future renewal periods, we may modify this contribution to put it both a fixed and a variable funding rate, but not to dip below. What I mean by that is, as in here, variable components to the eligible employees' achievement of predetermined wellness and health goals, such as annual wellness, physical compliance, age-appropriate preventative care goals, vision appointments, dental appointments, etc. Basically, we want the employees to use the insurance. From my past experience, when we've had really rich medical plans, we often find that our employees are not taking advantage of it. We have a compliance rate of less than 50% towards the annual wellness, the adult vaccinations, and some of the services like mammographies and colonoscopies. What we want to do is we want the employees to use these benefits, and we want to incentivize them, because if they do this and take advantage of the preventive medicine, we're less likely to have a negative or a bad medical outcome if we have folks checking in. As we mentioned before, because this is a consumer-driven wellness plan with a deductible, in the first plan year, GRTC will fund the HSA contributions for the eligible employees on March 1st, 50%, and then 25% on June 1st, and the remaining 25% on September 1st. So why is that? So that if we're funding the employee-only category $2,400 per year, and they're going to have a high deductible, they're going to have the $3,000 deductible. In the event that an employee incurs medical expenses within the first 6 months of the plan year, we want to make sure that they have HSA money there to cover those expenses. So therefore, in this first year, we want to front load it. Most likely, the experience in these plans are that the employees will end their plan year with residual contributions in their HSA account, which will carry over to next year. So our intent would then be to go to either a monthly or quarterly funding basis of the HSA in year 2. So as I mentioned before, how does this look from the employee's perspective? As I mentioned before, So if the employee was enrolling in the Cigna Open Access Plan, their annual cost, the 26 payroll deductions would cost them $2,074. That's 15% of the OAP. We're not going to charge them premium contributions. So right there, they would save $2,000. So when you look at it in the perspective, they have a $3,000 deductible. We're going to fund them with $2,400, but they also save in their paycheck $2,000. So what we could do that there is, so here is the deductible, the GRTC HSA contribution. There is a IRS limitation of maximum HSA contribution for employee only of $3,650. So we're saying is if the employee contributes $1,250 of their $2,074 savings, and then let the remaining $824.44 just flow into their net of their paycheck. When you take into the impact on deductible, $3,000, but they get $2,436. So they're already, plus the money they save, they're to the betterment of $1,474 on an annual basis. Similarly, on the employee, children, and spouses, they're either neutral or slightly positive, so that we feel that we've developed a program, whereas with the HSA contribution relative to the deductibles and the amount that they'll save in the premium reductions, that everybody, whether their categories, they would be neutral or slightly positive based upon the plan design. What is this? Why is this good to GRTC? As I said, we feel this is going to be cost neutral, but what the challenges with the fully insured plan is we're at the mercy of the renewals. Like I said, at the outset of the renewal, Cigna came back with a 29% rate increase. They went through the claims data and our fiscal 21 claims data. Because of COVID, we did have some higher claims, and what we really went through and worked with Marsh McClellan's underwriting folks to really break down those costs and those claims to basically show them that there were some anomalies and one-time charges, as well as we've had some, as you can tell by the vacancies, we had some significant turnover. So we had them really take a really hard look, and they wanted to keep the business with us, so they sharpened the pencil. We put the benchmark of single-digit increase, not to exceed medical inflation, through there as what it would take to keep us. In addition, through the negotiations, Cigna has capped next year's renewal at no more than 13% increase over the current. So we got a little bit of stability for the starting point of our negotiations for next year. So we feel that by offering a consumer-driven wellness plan, this will help us control our medical costs going forward. As you can see, the premiums for a consumer-driven wellness program are significantly lower than a fully insured, as well as it provides choice to the employees. So based upon this information, this effort, we're asking that the Board of Directors authorize the GRTC CEO to provide the dual offering of the OAP and the consumer-driven wellness medical plans for the open enrollment period for the upcoming medical benefit period of March 1st, 2022 through February 28th of 2023. Also authorize the CEO to execute a contract with Cigna to provide both the OAP and the consumer-driven wellness plans for that same period. In addition, to execute a contract with HSA Bank, which would be the trustee custodian for the HSA services, and then also authorize the CEO to fund the HSA accounts for the GRTC employees at the level of $2,400 for the employee-only coverage, and then $3,900 for the medical plan year for the employee plus children, employee plus spouse, employee plus family coverages. For those eligible employees who enroll in the consumer-driven wellness program for the medical benefit period of March 1st, 2022 through February 28, 2023. At this time, I'll take any questions.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second on this, and then we'll take any further conversation?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we authorize this change in what we're offering for medical care for our people. John, you're assuming here in the first year that 15% of our employees opt into this new plan?
Yeah, so we're looking at 50. The assumption is that 55% of the employees would be in the consumer-driven wellness plan, and the balance of the current, and this current is pointed about 307 OAP. So
You're assuming 35% go or 45% go into the,
No, 55 individuals, 55 contracts or 15%.
all right. And so what's the downside risk here? Suppose only half those go in. What happens to our budget?
I think we're right now, as it looked at what we showed you as the draft version, benefits were favorable relative to prior by about $200,000. So that would probably, that's why I made the comment earlier that we expect this to be cost neutral. So right now there's about $200,000 of cushion in the budget relative to prior year. So as we go through this open enrollment period, we're going to know within the next 3 weeks. So as we come back with you, the next budget version, we'll be able to crystallize based upon our who's enrolled in what. We'll be able to have a clearer picture. But even if we don't get our 15%, yes, our premiums will go up a little bit, but I don't think it will be significant versus what we just portrayed in the first draft of the operating budget.
All right. Other comments, questions?
Hey, John, this is
yeah, go
Gary. Am I good?
Yep.
So thanks for that presentation. Thanks for your work on this. I've had experience with companies that offer both of these. I think this is a great option to put out there. One of the key things, and I think you guys are all very good at this, but one of the key things around having people, figure out that this is a good option for them is you got to be really good up front in the explanation of these plans, because as we can all tell, they can come across fairly complicated and the benefits are hard to see sometimes. And so, I just encourage, the HR staff and others who are involved in this to really make sure they're doing a good job of laying this out in a way that's understandable and, can really see the benefits. I believe they can take their HSA balances with them, throughout their life. So another great benefit of this is kind of a health savings thing that can benefit them later in life as well. So I'm going to throw out the obvious, but sometimes we miss the obvious.
No, Gary, that's a great comment. And I kind of shorted that part of the briefing is that Marsh McClellan, working with Angela Malloy, our HR director, as well as Cheryl, the three of us have been working with them. Marsh McClellan has various decision support tools that actually go through, that the employer interactive, that they can go through and, put in, kind of what they anticipate the number of doctor visits, if they might have a significant medical procedure coming up. It's actually an online interactive decision support, which will help them with that. In addition, they have some tools called Jellyvision, which basically go through that. And you're absolutely right, is the HSA, if the employees are making contributions, they're also a tax shield to them as they're making pre-tax contributions into the HSA through the 125 plan. It can be a tax shield for them. And yes, any balances in the HSA, it's unlike an FSA where it goes away with the exception of a carrier. This money does not go away. Once it's awarded in there, it is the employees. And a lot of experience with folks that have been in HSAs for quite a few years is that at the time when they separate through retirement, they carry that balance with them and they can use that towards medical, vision, dental expenses as they go on Medicare. So it is a great tool. And all that, and this is, as your point is noted, is that Marsh McClellan has developed a bunch of communicative tools. We are going to have, potentially in-face meetings as well as Zoom meetings at off hours that are both pre-recorded for the employees to hear, as well as interactive ones where they can ask questions. So you're absolutely right. More communication, more information is better when you do this, so people have the opportunity to get as much information they need to make the decisions.
Thank you.
Any further comments, questions?
It's great work by the team on this. This is thinking out of the box, and it's a great option for employees.
My comment is it's really hard for me to understand, and I've listened to it twice. And so if you want me as an employee to opt into it, you're really going to have to find some way of doing it, presenting it simply so I can figure out how to work it.
Yep.
So I know that's what you just said, but I'm saying that's what happens. And I agree, it's an incredible piece of work.
What we can do is we can have Janice send some of the links to the materials if members of the board would like to see some of the decisions.
I've got a plan that works for me right now. So I'm not eligible for this one, but it does sound right, but it also is complicated. So it needs to be explained simply to somebody who you want to buy it. And we do want it to be used. So, all right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve this step forward in our health coverage. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed. All right, thank you very much for your work.
With that, that concludes the finance and administration items.
Okay, what's next? Julie, what do you got? You're all, yeah.
Yes, sir. In this case, we would move to the operations and maintenance report. So we're moving through the board meeting a little bit backwards. It would go to Cheryl to introduce Tim.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board
Good
members.
morning.
Happy New Year. First up, we will have Mr. Tim Barnes to present our operating report, and after that, we will give you some quarterly ridership, monthly and quarterly ridership report. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and everyone.
Mr. Barham.
Thank you. Starting with an overview of the KPIs, which are located on page 20 of your board packet. The lost time or the absenteeism rate has been pretty steady around that a little under 17%, due primarily to positive COVID cases. You know, we have had an increase over the last several weeks. So that has carried that number up to that level. Lost trips over the last few months, November and December, we have had over 3,000 or so lost trips, and that's everything from lack of manpower, some cases equipment shortages, incidents, accidents, and so forth. So that is a total number of all the items that could have created a lost trip or a missed trip. So we implemented to try to offset, at least from the manpower standpoint, the new booking that went into effect on December the 19th. What we saw was that with that new booking, which did reduce some of the service, we did see starting towards the end of December, around the last week or so, and into the first part of January, we did see a reduction of about 50% of our missed service. So we are encouraged by that, even though you do still see that downward trend through December, but we do see some positive effects that'll carry us hopefully into January and as we get into to this booking. As we continue to move forward into the booking, also that went into effect was the Uber pilot program. Initially, it didn't start right on the 19th or the 20th. We did have to go through and make sure that the Uber Central and the app for the customers was available, which is now available for everyone to use. We haven't seen any trips yet that customers have called in to utilize. What we did see in the beginning of the new booking, the latter part of December, we did see a few customers who called us, and we did have a few operators that were working overtime to assist with transporting customers that did call. We had about 4 trips or so during the latter part of December. So we had operators on overtime that actually helped with that. So we were appreciative for that. But so far, we haven't seen any, real big demand for that service. But we'll continue to monitor it and see what we can get maybe down the road. Complaints did go up slightly as well, due primarily to the missed service or late buses, as I mentioned earlier. And Specialized did have an increase in on-time performance, up around 84%. I do want to talk about some positive things that I can see on the horizon that will help us long-term. And let me start with staffing. We're currently at 244 full-time and 22 part-time operators. And as John mentioned earlier, we do have some shortages, particularly in the operator ranks. But since October, we've had several good classes that have come through or are going through the system currently. The October 25th class, we had 11 operators to start that class. 2 did not finish, or 2 were dropped. We have one that had already graduated, and we have another 8, the remaining 8 that will graduate within the next few weeks, around the end of January. Our December class, December 20th class, we started 8 operators. All 8 of them are still with us. They have completed getting their CDLs and should be graduating sometime around early March or so. And a class that we started earlier this month, January the 3rd, had another 9 new operators to start with that class. And they're currently going through the training as well. So since October, we've had 28 operators that have come through the operator ranks. 26 are still with us. And we have about another 100 or so applications that are still need to be processed. So we are very encouraged with what we've done over the last few months with recruitment, advertising, the changes to our hiring criteria and so forth, the new hire bonuses. All of those things have created this positive momentum when it comes to recruitment and hiring and training. So we're going to be processing those applications. We look to be having interviews over the next few weeks, probably the latter part of January. And hopefully we'll have a class starting somewhere around February, mid-February, and then probably have another class starting right after that sometime in early March. So we'll keep that momentum going, because we know that, with these shortages across the nation when it comes to, operators and employees in general, whether it's due to the great resignation or whatever that phenomena is that the economists have been calling it, we have been blessed and fortunate with what we've seen over the last few months, and hopefully that'll carry us through the current year as well. With COVID, the mask mandate, federal mask mandate is still in effect up through March 18th. We're continuing to stress to our employees the protocols that we've put in place now for, going on almost 2 years, because we have had that spike in the COVID cases that I've talked about earlier. And we did implement the vaccine bonus this past December, where employees that were fully vaccinated or had received the booster received bonuses. And, that was across the board for our entire staff, as well as for our contractor First Transit. So unless there are any other questions, that concludes my report.
I'd like to know, I don't know whether you could answer this or not, Tim, but maintenance staff, your mechanics and your maintenance employees, what's the opinion on that?
Well, Tony, I know will probably comment on that as part of his report, but I do know in my conversations with Melissa Shelton, our HR recruiter, and the HR department, that we do have quite a few candidates coming in for the maintenance department as well. In fact, they're doing interviews, I believe, this week as well, because they're doing their interviews, and it will come back to the operators later this month. I don't have the exact numbers. Maybe Tony will have those in it.
Thank you.
So Tim, go back to this. You say you've got 100 applications. What is it? How do you process these? How quickly can we move on them?
Well, what our HR department does is, when they get those applications, they go through and make sure they meet the minimum qualifications. They screen them, and then we immediately go into the interview process. It takes a few weeks to go through those, but what we're doing is we're not going to wait and just get a bunch of folks and then just start the class accordingly. We'll start the process now, or we have started over the last few weeks. Then once we go through a group, then we'll immediately get a class started. And that's what we did last time for that December, January group. We had, as I mentioned last month, with the candidates that we had for that group, basically split the class between two classes, late December and then early January. We'll probably do the same with this group. We'll get them processed here over the next few weeks and get a class started around mid-February and then early March.
Okay, I'm just, I hate to be stupid here, but I'm looking at 100 people and a class size of 9. Do you need help in terms of the ability to process applications?
No, I feel pretty good that our HR department is able to process them. in a timely manner. And I've had conversations not only with them, but with Tony Carter as well in our safety and risk management, as far as assistance that we may need on the training side, because we also got to make sure that once we get these people in, that we have proper safety protocols in terms of training and getting them through in a timely manner as well, because a lot of them, significant amount of them, don't even have their learners. So we have to work towards that as well. So we've had conversations about getting additional resources. I have some folks that have experience with CDL learners, CDL training as well, that are in the transportation department. So we've talked about maybe shifting people around to assist with that.
Well, just as we had a very rapid loss, which caused us to have to reduce service, so we would love to have a rapid increase as long as we can do it with quality here.
Mr. Campbell, if I might jump in, I do want to say that Tim is very much on point, that we have the resources to get people trained. You have seen and you've heard from him report for the last month, our class sizes have been either 9, 10, 11 people, and we've had multiple classes. Compared to what we've seen over the past year of COVID, what HR has been able to process and training has been able to train, it's a remarkable turnaround, and it is incredibly accelerated. I will say that when we report that we have 100, and I think Melissa said it was closer to now closing in on like 150, I might be over speaking, but it was a very large number when she mentioned last week of number of applications. Those are just applications, not necessarily all qualified. So that will go down as we actually process them. We are accepting more and more people who are, I want to say, less qualified than in the past. And when I say less qualified, I mean that in the past we would reject applicants who didn't have 5 points, positive points on their license. In the past, we would reject people who didn't have their CDL permit or license in hand. These are barriers we've reduced, which is why we are able to accelerate our class recruitment and class size. And Tim's able to get more people on the street faster. But it is still a process to get all those interviews filtered, to get them interviewed, and get them in a class.
Yeah, I'm appreciative of the work, and this isn't criticism, Tim. It's really trying to make sure that, in fact, we respond on the upswing with whatever speed we can, and if you need resources, that we try to provide those for you.
Appreciate that. Understood.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Thanks. Who's next?
Ms. Robinson
morning.
is up with our ridership report.
I'll share my screen here. All right, good morning, everyone. This is our monthly ridership report for December. Just wanted to take a quick look at our total fixed route for December being 674,493. Breaking down our local fixed route ridership to 539,148. This is a slight decrease in our month over month of 2.79%. That does follow our trend line from November to December. December typically has more holidays, more cold weather events than November. When we look at our December year over year for pre-COVID, we are at an increase of 7.18 increase in ridership. I did want to highlight line 20 here. This 25% increase in our Care Plus service in Richmond. We see that the Care Plus has really taken off in Richmond in particular. Henrico has had some varying numbers, so we're going to investigate that a little bit further, see if we can find the cause and potentially use it as a service model to continue boosting those numbers.
What is Care Plus?
Care Plus is our paratransit service.
Paratransit on demand? How does it work? I mean, it's not just the straight care.
If I can, Patricia, the Care Plus, those are those customers that we service that go outside of the federally mandated 3/4 of a mile of the service area.
Thank you.
And before, you know, for the city of Richmond, there was a $6 charge for that, but of course now we have zero fare. But that's basically what it is. Those folks that go outside that 3/4 of a mile buffer.
Good.
Thanks, Tim. The last thing on this report that I did want to also just notice is that our van pool trend at the bottom right here mirrors our express route trend that we're seeing in our year-over-year analysis on both items. These mostly mirror each other given the nature of their routes and the shift in dynamic between employers and employees in the work from home environment. Is there any questions on this report?
Thank you for your report. Next up is.
It's still.
Morning, everyone.
Tony, not yet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
She has to do the quarterly report.
Getting my screen switched over. All right, I'll jump into the quarterly report for Q2. This is October through December. I'll remind everyone that the report is broken down into route category. We've spent time previously going through each category, so I'll kind of breeze through them today. We'll start off with our BRT. This route is the only one of its kind, so we're not comparing it to other routes here, just itself. Its Q1 to Q2 ridership is at a -2%, so not too much fluctuation across the board here. Jumping into our arterials, I'll just kind of highlight things that have made major shifts. The arterials here, we haven't seen too much of an increase across the board. With the exception of the 3B, you will see an increase in revenue hours and revenue miles. This is because of the consolidation between Route 3B and Route 111. Outside of that, nothing out of the ordinary. Looking at the arterial productivity, Route 50 is flagged as being in the lower percentile for passengers per trip. They're in red, but we are seeing an increase still in percent change from Q1 to Q2.
Well, we've continually suggested that Route 50 be listed as local rather than arterial. And I don't know why that doesn't happen, but I think it's a good idea. It really is it's not an arterial bus. It's designed to be a local bus.
Yes, that has been in our conversations as well, as something to move forward with. When we look at our community radial routes, we don't have too much of a jump across the board here. There is a 16% increase in ridership on our 56. I will note that there is a slight increase in ridership on the 76, and I'm highlighting that because of the next slide when we look at the productivity. The 76 and the 77 both flag as being in the lower percentile. So they have, the 76, while it's in the lower percentile, it is seeing a slight increase in ridership from Q1 to Q2. The 77, while the percent change remains as positive, it did have a slight decline in ridership from Q1 to Q2. Switching to our circulator routes, there were no major shifts as far as ridership, revenue hours, revenue miles for these routes. And then when we look at productivity, we see our Route 88 again, which usually flags as our passenger per trip being in the low percentile, with just a slight change between Q1 and Q2. Also flagged as our Azalea connector, Route 93, as being higher in cost per passenger and lower in passenger per trip. Moving on to our express routes, we do see a slight ridership in the 64 and 29. This is to be expected with the Henrico Express route consolidation that happened in December. That's also why we're seeing this influx pretty heavily in revenue hours and revenue miles, as added trips were incorporated into the 29 to make up for those consolidated routes. Jumping into the express productivity, we are seeing that the 95 has the lowest percentile or highest for total passenger dollars or total dollars per passenger. This is also because of the length of this route. Our on-time performance for this quarter is 65, compared to 66 from Q1. Overall, our on-time performance is reflected here as the amount of on-time, late, and early trips.
Tricia, what's our goal for on-time performance?
I don't know why I don't have that number in front of me. I'm sorry.
It has been
80%. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
it has been 80, but we're looking at that as well. And we also, we joined a group, ABBG, to see if we can compare ourselves more realistically to other transit agencies around the country as well. So we are reevaluating that number, but currently the goal is 80.
Thank you.
From there, I'll just answer any additional questions.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no questions now. Mr. Tony Carter will give you our safety performance report for the month of December.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Cheryl. Overall, for the month of December, we had a pretty good month. I'll be starting with the actual safety performance report for December. This is found on pages 53 through 55 in the board packet. And as I stated, we had a pretty good month. Results for this month: external events in November, we had 35. In December, we had 32. Non-preventable incidents in November, we had 26. In December, we had 22. Preventable in November, we had 11. And in December, we had 6. So as you can see, the numbers are down. We had 3 rear-end accidents in the month of November. And in the month of December, we had 0. Moving on to specialized passenger events, we had 2. Traffic events, we had 5. Preventable were 4, and non-preventable were 3. And the majority of those incidents were minor incidents, fixed objects, things of that nature. Assaults on operators. We did have 1 verbal, was threatened, verbal threats of violence. And we had 3 physical, but 2 of those were between passengers, nothing to do with the operators. And we did have 1 situation that involved a supervisor, and that was a minor incident as well. To piggyback off of that, some of the things that we're doing so far as the safety department to help with the training when it comes to de-escalation, so that we can equip our operators with more tools on how to deal with those passengers that are causing some disruption. We're looking at additional training that we can find throughout the industry and throughout so far as de-escalation and things of that nature. But what we're finding that it's kind of hard to pinpoint it directly to transit and show some of the situations that we're dealing with every day when it comes to GRTC and our operators. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our staff and we're going to create those scenarios that we're actually seeing. And with the help of the marketing department, we're going to actually video scenarios and come up with situations on what we want or how we encourage the operators to actually handle that. A lot of it's going to be narrated through our training manager, Mr. Mark Carter, and he's going to give details on how to handle certain situations or how to not handle certain situations. And we'll be using our staff from the safety department, training department, and other employees to act out these roles and to show what can happen and what cannot happen when it comes to handling these type of situations. And if there are no questions, that concludes the safety performance report for the month of December. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Thanks, Tony. Next, we will have Tony Bird with our maintenance report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Our KPIs for the month of December were at 11,392 miles between roll calls. We exceeded our goal, which was 5,200 miles. The PMIs for the month of December were at 82% with a goal of 80%. Currently, 25% of the fleet is down for service and repairs with a spare ratio of 30%. Our team is working hard to get as many repairs completed and back in service. We continue to train our latest four new employees, members of our team, to get our buses back on the street. The new buses in service gives us time to get some of the older buses repaired and put back on the street. HR has applications that we need to go through in the upcoming weeks to hire more mechanics. And we continue to clean and disinfect the entire fleet daily. Are there any questions?
You're supposed to have 11 vacancies for first mechanics and 2 vacancies for support.
Yes, sir.
And how is that going? What's going on there?
We have applications from HR. We have scheduled coming up with scheduled appointments to do interviews.
So applications, 1 person, 5 people, 10 people?
At the present time, I have 5 that I know of.
Good.
Tony, in the report, it mentions in the background that the fleet rate, the spare fleet ratio is 20%, and then we talk about in the current status that the spare ratio is 30%. Is that
it's actually 30%? That's an error on my behalf.
Okay, so
Ian, if I can add into that, and Tony, we have a plan on file with the Federal Transit Administration that technically we're only supposed to have a spare fleet ratio of 20%. However, right as we were going into COVID, we were also looking at expansion, and instead of retiring vehicles to get our spare fleet down, we were allowed to maintain those vehicles as a contingency fleet. So it's a matter of semantics at this point. That total spare fleet is actually a combination of both the allowed spare fleet as well as a contingency fleet we're holding over for when we are able to expand.
gotcha.
All right.
Tony, are you outsourcing any care vehicles to anyone?
We try to outsource care vehicles to 4 dealerships, but they're running into the same situation we have. They don't have the manpower to keep up. The same with Cummins.
We also had conversations with the city of Richmond and with several others of our partners, and we found that there were thoughts that they could help, but when it came right down to it, when maintenance directors talked to maintenance directors, the staff just wasn't there.
So you're saying you're about 11 mechanics shop, 11 maintenance employees shop?
Yes.
Tony, for the future reports, would you mind putting together, I guess, a couple of previous months KPIs as well, kind of like the way that Mr. Carter puts together the safety report that allows us to see a little bit of a trend of how the KPIs are doing.
Okay.
And the goal of 5,200 miles, how is that established? Is that a national number?
Yes, it is. But we're looking to take a personal look at it and just raise the bar for just us to see what we can do better.
Very good. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Byrd.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, that completes no, I'm sorry, we have an action item, the snow removal. Sorry, Tony.
That's okay. This is a snow removal for transit station and shelter snow removal service. GRTC installs and maintains transit shelters and bus rapid transit stations to accommodate millions of passenger trips every year. For the safety and comfort of our passengers, GRTC provides required snow removal service at BRT stations during severe winter weather events. Further, it is GRTC's intent to provide supplemental snow and ice removal at high volume transfer points when feasible to support the effort of our jurisdictional partners and adjacent landowners for the benefit of our riders and essential workers. Procurement issued an invitation for bids for these services on December 7th, 2021. The staff received only 1 bid from Freeman's Pressure Wash and Lawn Care Service with the following per hour pricings that you have. Staff has used Freeman's previously for snow removal service and has determined they are qualified. They are a qualified contractor to perform all services. Freeman's is a Virginia Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity certified small enterprise. It's what we would like to recommend is that the Board of Directors authorize the CEO to execute a 5-year agreement with Freeman's Pressure Washing and Lawn Care for snow removal service for an estimated contract value of $290,981 to cover the average number of annual events and additional contingency not to exceed $200 $90, and $981 for years with beyond the average number of events for the total not to exceed the contract value of $581,962 over a 5-year term.
All right, could I have someone move that so we can discuss it?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we authorize this contract for snow removal. Is this, we pay if the removal happens? Is that what happens? This is not just a fixed retainer?
Yes, this is pay as it happens.
And this is the stuff, this is nothing new. We've been doing this. We always have to pay for it. Yes?
If I might,
Yep.
this is a little bit new, in that we've always had to pay for it, we always pay for it with the Pulse. There's an agreement with the city where we do maintain the Pulse platforms. However, we are looking to expand this, and that's why this is going to cost a little bit more than in the past, as we look to also provide these services and our main transfer points for local buses as well. That while those areas are covered by the city and local, they're covered by the city and they're covered by the adjacent landowners or businesses are required to do it. Sometimes in the midst of a snow event, snow gets plowed up onto our stops. This allows us to go out and proactively.
Danny, you want to go on mute?
Sorry, Danny. Yeah, there you go. So this is an expansion from what we've done historically in the past so that we can cover not just the BRT, but also our main local bus routes as well.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Are you aye, Gary? You're
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Anyone opposed? No, it's passed. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Byrd. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Adrian
sir.
is up
Yeah.
next. Thank you.
Good
Now
morning.
it's Adrian. Hello.
All right, first up for development, we have the micro transit study. We have with us Michael Baker, Nick Britton, as well as Alana and Jessica from Foursquare. As you know, the micro transit study, it kicked off in August, and they have been working to do all of the, they'll give you more details, but studies, arranging all the outreach, plenty more work to be done, but they're going to catch you up on what they've been working on so far and what is ahead.
All right, Adrian, thank you. And thank you for your time, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Let me share my screen here.
And also for members of our consultant team who are here to support, I'd like to remind you that if you do not share your video, our YouTube viewers will not see you on the screen.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen?
We are seeing you in with the regular PowerPoint with the miniature tabs on the side.
Oh, okay. All right. That should be the correct one.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you again. This will, we just wanted to provide an update today on where we were in this process. We've done a lot of kind of background work on leading up to some of the recommendations. We're not quite there yet, but what we have done at the end of last year was we conducted a public survey, which I'll go over in a little bit, to get input on sort of background transit or transportation habits and how that would relate to microtransit. We conducted interviews with 6 agencies across the East Coast, including Dayton, Ohio, and Albany, New York, to look at similar services in those areas. We also met with local operators that would include Access Chesterfield, Bay Transit, Dash up in Hanover, and GRTC as well, to go over potential opportunities and what challenges that may exist in implementing this type of service. And we looked through analyses for existing conditions, market conditions, and then suitability in this area. All of this leads up to working on identification of potential microtransit areas that we will look at for further consideration and then bring back to you at a future date. So quickly going over the public survey, we launched a survey on November 4th. It was advertised by GRTC and by the MPO, or the Richmond TPO Plan RVA as well. It ran just over a month until December 15th. At that time when we closed it, it had just over 900 participants. I just provided a brief look at the demographics. I think what stands out to me on the demographic side is that there was a pretty even distribution of age. Starting with the 20% with the over 18, or sorry, the 24 to 25 and then above. So I think we had a pretty good breakdown on the age, and then on the income, the highest distribution of income was over 100,000, but there was a pretty decent balance overall, 50 and below. So I think in terms of surveys for 936 participants, we had a fairly equal, in terms of these two categories, pretty equal distribution of the categories and the results. Just going over kind of the key takeaways that we learned from the survey. 45% of the respondents, so it's 45% of those 936 people, typically drove alone, and 60% of them rarely or never used GRTC services. So I do think that's a good way of kind of looking at some of the capturing of riders that may take microtransit that may not use GRTC's other services. So it's a good look at some of the people who aren't using transit. There was interest, though, in alternative transportation options. So that would include options that are not currently available in this region. A third of the people, those 936 people, said they would use some type of alternative transportation option once a week. And then almost, or actually, sorry, 80% of those respondents were willing to pay up to $6 per trip and then wait 20 minutes per ride. So those are fairly consistent with microtransit in terms of the parameters for service. So it is good to see that there is some interest in that on a weekly basis, and then those costs and wait times line up. And majority of the respondents were comfortable with app-based booking, which is also a key element of microtransit service. And when we asked them what the most important factors were in looking at a service and what would lead them to use it and be willing to pay the money and the wait to use it, reliability and cost were those most important factors. So this is a quick survey, quick takeaway of some of the key survey responses that we had from last year. And I will turn it over now to Alana, I believe, to go over peer interviews.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and good morning, everyone. So as Nick mentioned, we did these 6 interviews with peer agencies, and although their experiences differed, there were some key kind of common lessons learned that we were able to tease out from this effort. So I'm going to go through some of those here. First of all, we observed that many of the peer agencies said that microtransit's convenience was very popular among the riders that chose to use the service. And they did find that microtransit can increase fixed route ridership if designed correctly to do so with that in mind. Many of the agencies also noted there's value in piloting the service to kind of test the waters, iron out any initial operational challenges or things like that in kind of a more low stakes setting before then potentially growing the service. Agencies also noted how important it is to establish goals for the service, as well as service standards and a clear performance monitoring and evaluation process. Another one was the importance of zone size. There were several agencies that had created 2 large zones, and what they found was that that led to very high demand and high wait times, and they had to deploy more vehicles to serve those zones. So just keeping that in mind is very important. Education and marketing was also very important to the service's success, just making sure people know about the service and understand how to use it. And finally, agencies can't necessarily assume that most riders will use the app, but that being said, the education incentives can help. And the app usage is important because it reduces the amount of labor needed on the customer service side to keep the service going. And some of the technology platforms out there also function better when everyone is booking by the app. Next slide, thank you. So we also did a literature review, and then combining that with our peer agency interviews, what we were able to discover is that, in general, there's 3 kind of use cases for microtransit. And this kind of gets back to that point of really making sure you're clear about what you're trying to achieve with the service. So the 3 use cases that we identified were underperforming fixed route replacement, first and last mile connections, and new service area. Of course, there can be certain zones that are maybe achieving more than one of these purposes. But what we saw was that is that depending on the use case, kind of the intended primary benefits of the service can vary. So in the case of an underperforming fixed route replacement, typically we saw agencies were seeking to improve the customer experience and increase productivity or achieve cost savings as their primary intended benefits. For the first and last mile connections, logically, one of the intended objectives was to increase ridership on and connections to a higher capacity network, as well as increase coverage and kind of the reach of that network. And for a new service area, generally the primary goal or intended benefit was to increase coverage. However, we do see that all of these potential benefits of microtransit, many of them end up becoming kind of secondary benefits across most of the use cases. And enhanced safety is one that we saw kind of most agencies didn't set out as their primary purpose for the microtransit, but that could be a potential benefit if people feel safer using that service, especially late at night. So just something to keep in mind as we talk about these use cases. And as Nick mentioned, we did hold those operator meetings as well. And again, that was with Bay Transit, Access Chesterfield, Hanover Dash, and Tim from GRTC Care. And what we found through those meetings, we were, first of all, trying to make sure we understood what's happening in the region today and identify any opportunities for collaboration, and also just kind of have some initial discussions about whether there are opportunities to collaborate. And what we learned from those meetings, first of all, most of the demand response providers in the region are only serving specific populations. So that could be typically seniors, people with disabilities. Bay Transit is the one exception to that. What we found was also that there's widespread interest in seeing more transit options available to residents in the region in general. And none of the operators really expressed a lot of concern about overlapping service areas or anything like that. A third observation was that significant fare differences do exist. So some trips are free or $2, others charge $6. So that would be something we would want to keep in mind in thinking about a potential microtransit service and how that would affect traveler behavior. Most of the region's operators are continuing to explore new technology platforms for demand response or on-demand transit. Most of them are looking to potentially procure technologies, but one was looking to develop some type of platform in-house. So we see that as an opportunity to potentially coordinate or share software, or at a minimum, at least learn from each other's experiences. And the capabilities of the technology platforms out there do continue to evolve as well. And finally, we did observe that, the most rural areas in the region may be more difficult to serve with a truly on-demand service. It might not be efficient to have a driver, going 45 minutes out of the way to pick someone up. So we'll just have to think about that as well. Next slide, please. So looking forward, we're going to be looking at what locations in the region might make sense for initially rolling out microtransit to. So we have a 3-step process for identifying where that would be the case. In our first step, that's where we identify potential locations where microtransit might make sense. So we're looking at things like, where do the populations who are likely to rely on transit and use transit live? What are the destinations that they're trying to get to? And what is the density of the area that we might consider serving? Because microtransit generally makes sense in locations where you see a relatively high need for transit service and kind of a lower density that makes it not as suitable for fixed route transit. So we're doing a really data-driven identify potential zones for microtransit. And then, of course, we completely recognize there's always qualitative considerations as well. And that's why we'll be gathering input through meetings with localities throughout the region to make sure we are taking those into account as well and identifying areas where we think microtransit could be successful. Our second step is then taking those zones that we've identified for a potential microtransit service and prioritizing them. And so to prioritize areas, we look at 5 factors: intersection density, activity generators. We want to make sure we're connecting people to places that they actually need to get to. Land use. We know that locations that are more residential tend to have more productive and more successful microtransit service compared to job centers. Keeping in mind that, of course, we need to connect people to jobs as well. People of color to make sure that we're providing the service equitably. And we look at transit hubs. So we know that particularly in the case of first and last mile connections, people, we need to make sure that there are transit hubs connecting people to. So that's our second step. And then in our third step, we actually design the service. So we identify which zones make sense for which type of use case, refine zone boundaries based on some of the input we're getting on those local needs, and define operational characteristics like service hours and number of vehicles needed for each zone and things like that. So this is what we'll be looking at in the coming months. Nick, I'll turn it back to Nick.
Thank you. So just in terms of next steps, we're going to present preliminary findings to the regional partners, and then we'll be working more in detail on some of the local conditions and priorities that don't get captured, those qualitative items that Alana mentioned. We will have meetings with representatives of all the 9 jurisdictions that are in the Richmond MPO area. We'll also talk to Bay Transit since they are serving 2 of those jurisdictions in New Kent and Charleston County. We will come back to you and to the CVTA TAC to get more input when we have more of that data that we were mentioning to discuss. And then at that point, we'll have additional meetings with localities. So the goal of all of this, and this is, this is contingent upon a lot of the staffing issues and resources that have, been discussed today and that we know about. But the goal is to have 1 or more microtransit pilots launched possibly in FY 2023. But again, like I said, that is contingent upon other issues as well. So this time we're available for questions if you have any.
Are we talking about on-demand service?
Yes, and it's not so much where you have to schedule ahead of time. It's more like Uber and Lyft, where it is app-based. So you request a ride, and there's a software that kind of does the best. It has an algorithm for figuring out how to pick up people and what order. And so it is typically not going to be a solo trip. It can be, obviously, based on need, but that's the one way it does differ from Uber and Lyft.
So I might have a vehicle that's handling a particular area or region that then is approached by app to tell me that I need to be picked up or something like that.
Correct.
I'm really confused, and I'm sure you guys know it, between by your demographic description. The people responding to your survey are a much wealthier group of people than our ridership is in Richmond. You have 30% of your people with incomes of $100,000 or more. In fact, whereas our ridership is 75% 50,000 and under, yours is considerably higher. So I know we're talking about a bunch of different markets here, some of them in ex-urban counties. But anyway, that does concern me, and it also concerns me vis-a-vis the whole issue of app accessibility. I don't think we've done a really effective study that I know of that relates how app usage and cell phone usage relate to income and ridership necessity, and that's not a theoretical question when it comes down to the use. So that's just a question. You are talking about micro transit that picks me up from my house. Are you also talking about micro transit that takes people from the end of fixed route service to particular employment?
Yes, so there are, I'll flip real quick to some of the intended kind of end results. One of those options is those first mile, last mile connections. So it's not only, kind of that more of a large area that it's serving where there may not be transit. It also does supplement and complement the existing service as well.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Thanks so much for sharing this stuff.
And I do have one comment about the app usage. Typically, these services are supported by a call center type function. So it's not entirely based on whether or not you can use the app. That is a concern, especially when it comes to equity. So that is, that's something that we account for.
Thank you.
And just to touch base real quick, I guess, on the equity and the participants in the survey, how was the survey distributed, and are there ways to increase the number of survey participants among current and existing GRTC riders?
So it was an online survey. So it was advertised through GRTC's website, and then I believe through the GRTC social media efforts. And I also believe that Plan RVA did it to their social media outlets too. As far as increasing the participation on other groups, that's something we could talk about with Adrienne and her team to see if what other options may exist. I think there are ways.
Marketing did go out and we surveyed at actual bus stops as well.
So that data is included in those numbers as well.
Great, thanks.
Well, it looks like there might be some real opportunity for support and overlap in terms of the different on-demand services supporting the call center and perhaps an app. Is Bay Transit doing this already?
They are doing it in a part of their service area down in Gloucester Courthouse. They have the Bay Express, I believe that's what it's called. It is a pilot program currently partly funded by DRPT.
But their New Kent service is fixed route?
It is not fixed route. It is demand response, which requires roughly a day lead time for scheduling rides. So it's much more of that demand response service that you see out in rural areas.
Okay.
Mr. Campbell, if I might add, you did ask me to comment about how we would be looking to expand service in FY23. The baseline budget you saw did not include numbers for these studies. However, we do have funds set aside through the ARPA funds, possible CVTA funds as well to do these studies. The funding is there. what we need to do is develop the priorities for the region on which one do these come first, which of these models we would want to put in place to pilot, and those would be budget amendments as we move forward and as we identify these. These are not included in that baseline budget we discussed, but we are looking to do these in FY23 as we have results.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For good work.
All right, and this leads right into the Regional Public Transportation Plan. So I'll share that PowerPoint. All right, can everyone see it?
Yep.
All right, this is a very brief update on where we are with the Regional Public Transportation Plan. Similar to the microtransit today, they both kicked off at the same time in August. And since then, they have been making progress on FY23 baseline budget and assumptions, which ties directly into everything John went over. So those will be updated based on our new operating numbers and assumptions, and that will do the projections to the future years. Microtransit study, of course, is being done in parallel. And that will be the recommendations that come out of that, as well as the prioritizations, will go into the study when complete. And we are setting up meetings with the jurisdictions to review all the expansion priorities that we did last year and anything new that jurisdictions would like to add. So as far as our baseline, John mentioned this, Julie did as well. Our current system is our priority. We are not recommending at this point, based on resources, any expansions. Our system already is regional, already is essential. The CVTA funding estimate for FY23 projections is $27 million. We are using the year before to cover, just like this year we use FY21. This next fiscal year we'll use FY22. And then as far as priority number 2, besides maintenance of service, our local match. Keisha went over all the grant applications that we plan on doing in the next fiscal year. We'll do the same 2% recommendation for local match for FY23 as well. And then a reserve for large capital projects. This is just the CVTA funds. If we have any large projects, we would of course come back, ask for an amendment to move forward with that. Just like next slide, the prioritized expansion, if anything, as far as prioritization, and we had the resources available from our full list, and this is both for the microtransit or the full-fledged list for fixed route expansion, we would come back to both the board and CVTA and ask for an amendment to put anything in FY23. But at this point in time, we are just moving forward with the baseline. Just a reminder, I'm not going to go over this list, but this is everything we had come up with last year for all of the expansion priorities. They are still a priority for the jurisdictions over the next few years. And of course, the microtransit pilot and the others that would be rolled out in the future years would be added to the expansion priority list. As far as next steps, the parallel study will be complete and that will be rolled in, as I mentioned. We will discuss the future enhancements for the jurisdictions that may not have had anything as far as fixed route service in the prior year. We will complete the draft report, come back to the board, the MPO, and CVTA, and the same thing with the final report. The goal is to have everything finalized by May. Are there any questions? All right, I will jump right into the TDP. I'm going to share that because it does have a list on it. All right, I have a lot of windows open. Okay. All right, this is our routine annual update for the Transit Development Plan. It is due, as usual, before we apply for our state grant applications. So this actually is due today to the state. It shows our operating baseline budget as well as our projections and shows what we closed out for the year before. So on it is our service improvements as well as our capital plans for the previous year, current year, and our projections over the next 10 years. I have on here just highlighting some of the things that we did do in beginning of FY21, where we did the Route 50 to downtown and been watching that. And I know that Reverend Kimmel continues to ask for that to be relocated off of the arterial list. So we have seen progress with that, but we'll continue to watch it. The 77, that one saw changes when it was brought down to DCU. We made small tweaks to the 2B, and then frequency changes on the 78. And our Route 1 was changed to be just a Route 1, not a 1A, BC on Sunday service, and stops at Southside Plaza and makes connections from there. FY22, everything, of course, was impacted by COVID this year and last year. The consolidation of Route 111 with Route 3B, that is the only thing that we have done. Besides, we did do reductions because of resource issues. And then some plan highlights. I just have FY24 through 27 on here, and this is the full list of everything that's also in the Richmond Public Transportation Plan. And then as far as capital projects, I'm not even going to go through these because Keisha already went them in full detail, but this is a highlight of some of those from there. So this is the 2021 TDP update and will be sent to DRPT.
So there are 3 routes there which relate to particular destinations. One is to John Tyler Community College, which doesn't exist anymore. I believe it's called Bright Point or something like that.
It is called, yes, you are correct.
College formerly known as John Tyler. The second is the extension of a route to Brook and Parham, which does not go to Reynolds Community College, and I continue to feel that that needs to be re-explored. That is the city of Richmond's main community college, and the only way you can get to it, if you're a person who needs public transit from Richmond, is to go downtown, walk to the downtown campus, take the downtown campus bus to the Parham Road campus. It's a very difficult thing, and it's we need to provide service there. So I don't know what we have to do there. And the third is apparently, and I think we'd all be interested in knowing, service to the new Amazon facility at Laburnum and Carolina Avenue, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that the Route 3A extension would be the one that would be closest to that.
Does it get up to the facility itself?
So all of these, I would say, are in their infancy in terms of planning. The alignments were discussed with the jurisdictions. They are in the report for planning figures. They would still have to be fully worked out in terms of finalized alignment and then a full-fledged amount of outreach that would end up with some tweaking as well.
Okay, well,
there was a
version outreach
did go
to 2 of them. So I want to make sure that I get to know what's going on here, particularly on the Reynolds and the Amazon, please.
Yes, definitely. As they come about either in FY23 in the future, we'll be sure to keep you updated as well as involved.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? This is due today, right?
It is due today.
Great, good. Okay, thanks, Adrian.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you're ready for us to proceed, it would be the CEO's report next on the list.
Do it. Let's go.
Oh, thanks. I'm going to keep this relatively short. As I was thinking over the past week over what to include in this report, I realized that I want to keep this short. You have heard most everything you need to hear from staff. They're doing a remarkable job keeping this organization running, remarkable job addressing issues as they come up and reporting those out to you. A couple of things just to highlight the vaccine mandate. You may have seen the Supreme Court did rule against the Biden administration's mandate for vaccination requirements for employers of over 100 people. That includes us. We are continuing to look at whether or not we should still implement a vaccine mandate. We have about 30 people throughout the organization who have not reported their status to us, and we are looking to see whether or not it is in the best interest of our staff health-wise, as well as our riders, to make that mandate happen. So that is still on the table. The interim transfer center, you remember downtown, we are moving our bus bays from 9th to Clay and to 8th. That has been shifted. Originally, we were going to be moving this week, but that date changed because of the status of contracting or contractor work along that street. So it is expected the shift will happen in mid-February. We are still working through the final designs and approvals for the movement into the new temporary center in the parking lot on 8th and Clay. As soon as we have the procurement contract underway, we should be able to bust loose those IFBs to get that contract support and begin some groundbreaking to improve the infrastructure there and move in the likely at this point late summer, early fall of next year or this year. Finally, for board meetings in 2022, we had anticipated to start meeting in person with Omicron surge going on both around the region, around the country, and within our own staff. As was stated, the initial motion this morning is we need to continue to maintain virtual meetings for the continuity of our governance and our operations. At this time, we do have the February 15th board meeting scheduled as in person at the RRTPO meeting room, courtesy of Plan RVA. That address is 9211 Forest Hill Avenue. We will still have the virtual option available for members who cannot or choose not to attend in person. Board members and staff will be required to meet in person unless there's a new announcement from this board saying that the state of emergency is such that we are required to continue to meet virtually. So please be aware that that is still in flux. The plan is to meet in person. However, as with this month, that might change as we watch the status of the surge of Omicron. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I think for the beginning of FY 2022, or sorry, calendar year 2022, that is quite enough. And if there are no questions, that concludes the CEO's report for January.
Thank you, Ms. Tim. Any questions of her? All right, I have a couple of comments. First, John, I'm fully aware of what budget language is about, but it jars me to talk about favorable when we're missing employees. So I don't know if you can play with that, but to say that such and such a budget item is favorable because we're down 50 people just always seems really strange. I do, however, appreciate your use of the phrase "provide the walk across." I have no idea what it meant, but it was really marvelous. And I trust I'll learn how to read it, to use it at some point in the future. Adrian, does Adrian have a new person working with her that has not been introduced?
That person officially starts today. She is not on the phone, so I intended to introduce her at the next board meeting. But yes, as of today, we do have a new director of planning and scheduling. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Chair, and very, very excited to have her on board.
Do we have any idea why the thank you very much. I look forward to meeting her. Do we have any idea why the BRT ridership has not picked back up to the same level as our fixed route service has?
There is a significant portion of the BRT routes, and I will say first, do we know for certain? No. Do we know very likely? Yes, and very likely the case is that there was a good portion of the ridership that dropped when COVID hit, about 50%. That 50% drop was based on the state and city employees teleworking as well as VCU. Now, VCU is back, but state and city are not necessarily. So we wouldn't expect to see those riders back on board. I expect that's the reason for the continued low ridership on that. However, if you look at the quarterly ridership, it is still a very, very highly productive, highly efficient route. It's just compared to pre-COVID, it looks low.
Okay, thank you. I have no further comments. Does anybody else have anything to say for the good and welfare of this board? If not, thank you very much to all of the staff and board members for your continued work in producing a a really fine operation for Metropolitan Richmond. I will make no doubts about the fact that first place, I have no idea what our board is going to be in the next 2 or 3 months, and hope we'll get that sorted out with the CVTA and the jurisdictions. And I do feel that we need to understand that we're still running one of the smallest footprints of public transportation of any city our size in the world. That we started way, way, way behind when we began to try to expand. We've done a little bit, but we have a lot more to do. And I deeply hope that we can find not only the resources, but also the money to expand this service out to where it really needs to be for a healthier metropolitan city. So that's it. I'm going to close the meeting